hi everybody. Welcome to the next episode of FinOps on Azure. This podcast's about trying to bring people from the community to come and talk to us about FinOps and cost management topics related to Microsoft Azure. It's about extending our knowledge and learning new things and new perspectives. Today we're joined by Nino Crudele, who's an old friend of mine. I've known Nino for many years. We both come from an integration architecture background. Nino's now one of the top security people that I know. I always love chatting to Nino because he always makes me think about things I've not thought of. I wanted to bring him onto the podcast because I think there's a really interesting relationship between security and cost management and FinOps, and really just I think in the cost management area we need to think about who our other stakeholders are and what their relationship to cost management is, and I thought that would be a great way to get Nino's perspective. Welcome to the podcast, Nino. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself quickly?
Hey, Mike. So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and having a chat with you about techie stuff. In this case, about costing and security is very interesting topic. Just about myself, I am in the IT field since more than 30 years, I think. It's quite a very long time. And as you mentioned, I have what historical past on integration across Bespoke and many other things, Bespoke server, many other things. I work a lot across security, and all this time I had the opportunity to work with very big company, enterprise company, big scenario, all these kind of things. Very challenging. I am Microsoft MVP for security. Microsoft MVP since 2007, so it's quite very long time. So always enjoy, working with technology, all these kind of things. And in the time I moved on security even much more. I see a very interesting, I would say, side in all this area. For me, is just fascinating how much security can actually affect everything, and how much is important, right, across anything, even across cost, right? So we are speaking about cost today, so that's another very interesting area to speak about. Yeah, definitely.
So I'll just, before we jump in with the first question, I'm just going to share with the audience a blog article. So that this blog article we wrote recently on the back of some real world discussions, and also one of the previous podcast episodes we were talking to Rick Hepworth about it, like a cost breaker pattern, or certainly this cost issue Rick had. So we wrote a little pattern about how you could implement this. So Rick had a problem where files were being uploaded to an FTP site that triggered a consumption logic app that loaded data into a database. And the problem was that an admin who didn't know that this, how this solution worked, needed to store files on an FTP server, and just started uploading files to this server they thought was fine to upload them to, not realizing that they triggered this integration. So the problem with this was because it was consumption, cloud just burst scales out and processed, hundreds of thousands of files that were being uploaded, and then the customer came back after the weekend to an unexpected big bill. And that kind of really started bringing me into, how, from this case, how could we have stopped that? Because obviously the billing data is 24 hours later in many cases. Raising a cost alert, you've already spent a lot of money. So we were looking at patterns around how do you do a circuit breaker, which you can see we talked about earlier on, to say, look, this isn't working the way we expect, can we block that? So that article really was the primer that made me sort of think about how do I learn more about security and the relationship between security and cost management. What are the areas do they kind of touch each other? And I thought, my go-to person for that kind of discussion is Nino. So, from your perspective, tell me about, combination of your experiences with cost from your history as an architect, but also now you're in security. What kind of discussions do you have about that relationship between cost and security?
Right. So, in my experience, I mean, I had a lot of different experience. One of the biggest I remember, just very short, it was a global company, and it was a very complex situation. Um, was like uh, 8 Azure Enterprise Agreement for more than 5,000 subscription and a lot of different things. So it was quite complex scenario, and I learned a lot in this experience. A lot. In my experience, managing cost on Azure. I'm speaking about Azure now, but I think we can just generalize this in cloud. But let's speak about Azure and use Azure just as an example, because that was actually Azure. And managing cost on Azure involves, I would say, a strategic blend or blending of planning, monitoring, and optimization. I work on many projects, but especially on project where just for example, the initial budget allocation were just quickly surpassed due unexpected resource consumption. That's it. You are just using cloud, and just surprisingly, boom, you have like a 100,000 or 500,000 pounds like that gone. You don't even understand how this happened, and this is quite really scary, right? Because you cannot even understand how these things happen so quickly, and that's, I think, is the most, I would say, worst side of the things. But this taught me the importance of utilizing Azure Cost Management tools from the onset, I would say. Like, for example, Azure Cost Management, the billing, the budgeting, the using the cost analysis, all these kinds of things, all these tools. You can be surprised how many people they actually, I would say, not ignore, but they don't actually consider the importance of using good tools for that, which is something that for me is essential. If you want control cost in the cloud, you cannot think about controlling cost in the cloud without tools, right? Microsoft Azure provides several tools and things in the cloud to do that. You can even build your own tools. You can use third-party tools. Why not? I mean, there are many in the market, but definitely you need the tools to control your cost. You cannot think about, I discourage people of using or building their own tools for managing cost, to be honest, because initially it was something okay, but my experience from what I learned in the field, now the scenario is really complex, is much more complex than in the past. There are too many factors, and you need the people with very good experience on that. This is where tools come up, because these tools are actually built by people with experience in the field. They know, right? They know about, this is what we need to control, this is what we need to check, this is what we need to be aware in the cloud, right? It makes the life much simpler, right? So like, for example, just setting up a budget and alert, it just could practically manage resources, right? So just using these simple things. Other things like Azure Advisory. Azure Advisor is really good. It's just a tool out of the box in the cloud. I found this very useful in the past, just providing recommendation, and most of them, they are quite easy and simple recommendation. It can be unbelievable. I remember the first time I just look about it was the Azure advisory cost, and we actually discovered a saving cost of several £100,000 just because just dismissing virtual machine, not even use or disk, not even using the cloud, right? So yeah, I mean, it's that is my thinking, I would say, when if I need just to speak about my experience, right? I would say tools are the key point, definitely today.
Yeah. So when you're speaking to customers about Azure, and you're speaking about security aspects, how does cost come up in those discussions, or does it even come up in discussions about security?
Yeah, there is definitely a very strong relationship between cost and security. Sadly, I don't know why, but most of the time, I don't see a lot of discussion across cost and security, which may surprise me a lot, to be honest, because I see a very strong relationship between them. There is actually a direct correlation between cloud cost and security. I mean, when you announce a security measure, I mean, this often requires additional cost, additional resources, and this actually escalate cost, right?
Yeah.
Especially today, we have all these big tools across the cloud. Look about the Microsoft Azure. We have this big discussion about advanced threat protection. We have Microsoft Defender. We have Azure Sentinel. We have so many tools, which are absolutely great. We need these tools. We need these tools in security. However, like advanced threat protection services or even using private connectivity option increase security, but also the expenditure across, right? The cloud, it could quite be big cost, so it's quite important. Even, but however, the cost of this measure is really minimal, in my opinion, compared to the potential financial impact of a security breach. This is what company often don't really get the point and understand, right? So there is a balance. You really need to look about this balance between a tool cost to prevent a security breach to a potential financial impact of a security breach. And this is where usually companies don't look really careful, right? So what is going to happen to you in case of a security breach in your company? Have you really evaluate this is what I really love to do. Like, for example, I really love to do threat hunting. I love threat hunting activity in the company because this is one of the most important activity where it's actually giving you this idea about potential security breach. And this is where it's giving you the idea about a scenario in case of a security breach, right? And also understanding about what can be the financial impact on that, right? So I absolutely advocate the for a balanced approach, right? Which is not going to compromise security for cost saving. That's something that absolutely
it's a good trade-off, isn't it? So I think one of the things I wonder is so I love chatting to you about security topics, and I know you always talk about the triangle of people, process, and technology.
Oh yeah.
I know I'd make you smile. So one of the things if I think of some of the things we've talked about in the last few weeks, which sort of touch onto the security side, particularly the process and people side, because I think these are definitely some of the bits companies should think about. So two examples are, one, we had a customer who had sort of a really big SQL Server database span up, like the biggest SQL Azure database that you can have, which costs in the 40,000 a month region. That triggered a cost alert, which was good. But the problem is nobody, like we asked around and nobody knew who spanned that database up.
Yeah.
And nobody knew what it was used for. And
Sure.
you know, it's kind of gaps like that. And there was another one in one of our previous podcasts we've recorded with Gregor. Gregor was talking about how they've identified some cost savings, and there's a couple of VMs, and they don't know if they can be downsized because they don't know who uses them. And I think when it comes to the process side, you know, to me, I don't know about you, but to me that falls into a security gap. If you don't know who owns the service, then you know,
Definitely.
it's like it's not just a cost issue; it's also a security issue. How do you know if it's, you know,
Definitely. Yeah.
Sometimes we've even had scenarios where, you know, I was telling Gregor about this one. I think there was an integration that's been running for years, and it works perfectly fine. Excuse me, but it turns out the business don't use that service anymore. So while it's sitting process and doing its job, nobody actually realizes that it has no value to the business and it should be decommissioned. So that's like an attack scope that is there because somebody's not decommissioned stuff that could
that's
costs.
That's you are actually touching here a very, very important point. I really advocate the importance of tying and relate governance with security together. You cannot have governance without security and vice versa. You must bind governance with security. I see so many companies speaking about or managing governance without any real relation with security, or vice versa, or looking about security without governance. That is the clear example. So, for example, one important tips, this is actually I've done in the past, and it was extremely useful. It was the usage of policy, Azure policy. It's so important. It's so important. I saw so many companies around, and still see companies around, not using Azure policy, I would say, in a good and extensive way. They just use some of the policy, right? But they don't use the policy in a smart way. Policy is the way you can enforce your rule in the cloud, right? So when we speak about who is using this machine, who is doing that in the cloud, that is something that you can enforce, like, for example, using tags. Enforcing tags. When you create an Azure resource, then you can enforce with a policy and say, you need to create these tags. Like, for example, owner. Who is the owner about this resource? Who is managing this resource? What is the department? And many other things. And you can use even this also for cost management, right? But you need to enforce this rule. And to do that, the best things to do this is just using Azure policy. Azure policy, in my opinion, is one of the most, if not the most important asset in the cloud in terms of governance and security. If you are not using Azure policy in the cloud, I can tell you straight, your governance is not good. And also your security for sure has a problem. So it's very easy, I would say, even if I give you just a tips for a quick assessment. Go on your cloud, ask your people, ask for the list of the Azure policy actually using the cloud. If you don't get a document with the list of Azure policy using the cloud and why, with all the rules, I can tell you straight, you have a problem for sure for governance and security. Very easy.
So I feel like from what we're saying here is that kind of effective asset management underpins both security and cost management to be done effectively.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
Is if we go for like speaking about access control, all these kind of things in the cloud, especially for costing, right? So access control, especially for billing data, are super crucial, because super crucial for maintaining the integrity, and confidentiality of financial information. You have a lot of financial information about your cost, so access control for billing data is super important. And in my view, Azure role-based access control is the solution for that, right? So using RBAC, it provides actually a very solid framework, right, so to control all access in your billing information. There are specific roles to control access in your billing in the cloud, and you need to use specific roles for that, not generic roles, right?
Yeah. So what's your view then? So we, obviously being a product company, we've built features around that. What's your view on? So what I tend to find a lot of customers is FinOps practices want us to democratize billing data, so the team that build the solution and run the solution can see the billing data for their solution to effectively cost manage it. We think that's a good thing. But then at the same time, what we find a lot of companies is that only the central Azure admin really has permission to see the billing data, and then we often find there'll be some arbitrary manager who isn't really technical, doesn't really know the Azure portals, but's been given permission to go and like investigate the billing data. And it feels like while RBAC is the framework, I feel like it's not effectively implemented in Azure to really get.
That's the problem, exactly. I mean, the problem is, and this is where tools can help a lot the customer, because actually RBAC, role-based access control, is a fantastic framework inside Microsoft Azure to control access to the Azure resources, even cost management, all these kind of things. However, it requires experience or knowledge. You need to know how to use role-based access security. You need to know what kind of role you need to use, all these kind of things. It requires knowledge for that, of course. Of course, the usage of a tool for that, it may, just save time and just ensure the customer that, okay, nobody actually got access to my billing cost inside Microsoft Azure, but the tool. And the tool itself is actually managing the access to your billing data in the cloud. This is where you can actually leverage this experience from the tool into the cloud. If you have experience into Microsoft Azure, then you can use role-based access security, of course, by your own. There are roles for that. So, but nothing changed from the idea of how much is important in big organization, even not just in big, but in organization, where the segregation of duties, right, which is actually segregation of duties is necessary, right, to prevent the misuse of data, all these kind of things. Other very important things, especially with access control for billing data, is regular audits and review. This is something not many companies do. It's something but it's so important. It's just having a review, especially audit across access permission, everything, and just helping keeping this aspect of cloud governance in check continuously, right? This is what not many companies do that. They just forget sometimes, but it's so important.
So with if we take a step back for a minute, then and think about more fundamental security things. So when I think about security, I'm assuming a lot of security architects are focused on protecting the customer's assets. Do you feel that that scope includes cost as being an asset, or being I'm trying to think of the right way to describe it, but it's kind of like does protecting the company's budget really fall within the scope of a security person? Because I know they care about protecting my web app to make sure nobody hacks it, but do they care about my Azure budget to make sure nobody abuses it? Because in the same way, it's hacking my web app can result in me losing money. In the same way, misusing my, say if I've got $1 million a year assigned to Azure, but somebody misuses blows 100,000. That in a way is an accidental security issue, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. There is a quite complex discussion, I would say, speaking about budgeting, protecting the budgeting across, especially in the balance between protecting resources or protecting the budget. It can be a quite tricky discussion, especially because very high level people, they especially high stakeholder, they don't get really the point. They just see the budget. This is what they are keen about. They don't really see, the idea about protecting the asset and how much it can be, how much can affect your budget for a security breach, right? They don't get this, and most of the time that is the problem. I saw companies actually completely, messed up just because a security breach, and because especially for reputation, companies just lost millions, and instead of just investing 3, 4, 500,000 pounds in a security budgeting and do things properly, or just buy good tools, because if you don't have people, you can always rely at least on tool. But I saw companies, I don't want to make names here, but they just lost millions, and also reputation, which is actually invaluable, right? So definitely is so important, this aspect. But it's quite tricky, to balance this kind of discussion, especially with high stakeholders.
I think they're kind of like quite abstract discussions, aren't they? That really high level. And my feeling was, just that the typical scope of a security engagement is really focused around a specific app or a general kind of infrastructure.
Yeah, it is. I see your point now. Yeah, definitely, yes. Most of the time when I see people start engaging discussion about security, it's always about the asset. They don't engage a discussion about, like, for example, security related to budget, which is much more related to the idea about helping the customer across. That is your budget. Looking about, for example, just going back on my discussion, like a threat hunting. Right? I don't see company doing threat hunting. Why not? Why you are not doing threat hunting? It's such an amazing activity. I would say super important. Get an expert in your company, looking about your business, looking about the profiling of your company, helping you understanding what actually can be the risk for you. Right? This is where is driving you the idea about how to use your budget in a good way, and not just let people jumping and start spinning up technology like that because people say that, like, let's enable Microsoft Defender everywhere, let's enable Azure Sentinel. What about Azure Sentinel? And we go to the discussion here about logging and other things, which is so expensive in the cloud, is crazy expensive.
So actually that does cut really nicely onto the next question, which was about a lot of customers tell us that the log analytics or logging bills are way higher than they planned for. I think to me the first problem is it's difficult to estimate that cost when you don't know how much logging you're going to do. But obviously we have the trade-off where from a cost management we want it to be as cheap as possible, but from a security and a performance perspective we want to log a rich set of log info to help us
definitely
identify issues and troubleshoot performance issues. What's your thoughts on the balance there? Where do you?
I would say, verbose. I call this verbose logging, especially when we speak about log analytics. Indeed, they incur in significant cost. right? Is always like that. And the key is, I would say, the key is to strike balance between detailed logging necessary for effective monitoring and diagnostic and cost efficiency. That is the real challenge. Usually my approach involves assessing the critical of logs in general and adjusting, in the time, the retention period, usually based on the value they provide. So this is actually usually my approach. For not essential log, just go and reduce the verbosity, or like employing shorter retention period, because they are just used and you don't care, right, about
so
these
just
logs.
spitballing a few ideas around that. So I guess one of the most common ones I see is, let's say we've got 100 VMs and people just turn on maximum logging for everything as one of the defaults. And I think, to me, so there's a couple of questions there about which VMs are the high value ones I want to care about the most versus the lower value ones. Maybe you want to keep the logs longer for the higher value ones, but then obviously you've got the challenge of, well, if I compromise the low value VM, does that give me, we've talked about this before, does that give me a route to the high value ones? And then I guess there's different logs as well, so maybe performance.
No, there are so many logs, a lot, especially, let's go simple now. Let's go for Windows or Linux machine and so on. You can quickly enable, very easy, a lot of logs, which is going to create you such amount of logging. It's actually unbelievable, believe me. Even technology like F5 for F5 firewalling, you cannot even imagine by default this technology how much log they can send into log analytics. I can tell you that because I see these kind of things every day. And this is where I would recommend two different strategies. One is using Azure Policy, as I was mentioned before, where you can actually create use cases, correct use cases. This is where you need to get an expert on board and telling you this is the use cases logging you need in your company. Don't make the big mistake. There are some baseline logs that, of course, this is logic. You need to get this kind of, I would say, logs, critical logs by default, I would say. There are a few of them. However, depending by your business, your threat profile, everything, you may need different things, right? This is where the security expert come up and is telling you that's looking at the profile your company, and for threat profiling, this is the kind of log and use cases you need. And after that, you can even set the right policy in the cloud to enforce all people. When people are going to enable a log in the machine or something, the policy are going to enforce them and say, that is the log you need to use in your machine, right? You can do that. And it's saving you a lot of time and such amount of money, because most of the time the big problem is just not having the view and control about what's happening in the cloud. And you cannot have control by your own. You cannot people just watching what people are doing. That's ridiculous. What you need to do, you need to use the proper tool able to enforce your rule. Azure Policy, one of them. And the second is also creating use cases is so critical. Don't start spinning up things in the cloud without a clear idea, a good use cases of logging. What do we need? Why? Right? And after that, you go and set these logs. This is how you're gonna save a lot of cost in the cloud, definitely.
So I think when you talk about policy, it makes me wonder about some of the issues that we've talked about with people recently. One of them was, in fact, a lot of them, but the number of issues that are like misconfigurations of resources. I'll give you a good example. Was we saw some SQL databases that were a UAT environment. There were pretty high number of vCores on them, and they were set to business critical, so they were really expensive databases, but they were in the UAT environment and they were barely being used. And the kind of changes we did were first one's just to make it general purpose, half the cost immediately, but then there's other things like reducing the number of vCores, scheduling so that during the business day it's got more cores available, and when it's not being used it's scaled down and stuff. But that whole problem in the first place about misconfiguration, I guess, really comes into the security angle as well, of actually if you're misconfiguring resources for cost, then you're probably misconfiguring stuff that creates security issues as well. I guess there's a huge training kind of gap in some places, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. It's a misconfiguration a lot. Is something that I often see around, and it can affect the cost a lot. There is also, I would say, a quite important discussion across technologies and choice, the good choice, but the good technology, which may, look quite expensive, right? But it can be quite cost effective in the long term and the long strategy. When we speak about SaaS, PaaS, and other technology, like for example, let's speak about Express Route, right? Express Route for networking, right? For people who doesn't know what Express Route is a Microsoft technology. Is a network macro technology that is providing the possibility to integrate your network company into the cloud. So essentially, when you enable Express Route in your company network is going to be inside the Microsoft Azure backbone network. That it makes your company completely full isolated from internet, from the public internet ever, anything. That is the most secure way to close your network. If you want to put your company in a bubble, Express Route is the solution. It's of course more expensive than other solutions like a site-to-site VPN or point-to-point VPN and many other things. And I saw many companies in the past looking about using point-to-point VPN, site-to-site VPN, and spinning up 1,000 of point-to-point VPN instead of using an Express Route solution, without considering how much is going to affect your cost. Looking about managing all these VPN and point-to-point site VPN, all these people looking about this networking setting, all this possible misconfiguration with all possible security effect you may have in the cloud, instead of just installing an Express Route Security and just close your network, right? So you may be surprised that calculate something like that. You may discover you are going to just save 200% of your cost just because you install an Express Route Security.
Well, I guess that really touches on the, cost management. To me is not just about solely my Azure bill. There's also other costs in your overall, your total cost of ownership, and that one to me is the complexity cost as well, isn't it? You've got the VPN versus Express Route cost, but actually the cost of maintaining that complexity is technical debt, that you need people who know how it works and
how it works, everything.
Yeah, that probably costs you as much as what the Azure bill would cost.
Absolutely. Think also about the security aspect, because in the moment you enable an Express Route, you are just closing your network. That's it. Job done. But instead of managing 1,000 point-to-point site VPN across users, you don't even know what these users are doing, right? So security speaking is also extremely much more dangerous than any other kind of solution. And even point-to-point site-to-site VPN, thinking about the bandwidth, thinking about bandwidth, because when you engage express route circuit, you have the top bandwidth ever you can have working with the cloud and Microsoft Azure. Something you don't have if you have a site-to-site VPN. You need to manage bandwidth in a completely different way, different provider, maybe using compression tools, TCP/IP protocol compression tools, all these kind of things to solve other problem. When you start, looking about all this cost across, you may be surprised, how much it's gonna cost you everything. And yeah, definitely. So I saw so many companies, just don't thinking in this way and just look about in very simple way and say, oh, express route is just costly, and I'm going for point-to-point VPN or something like that. See, I'm so surprised, and say, man, do you remember our discussion about the chicken way, right? This is the chicken way, right?
The short-term benefit. Yeah,
the short-term benefit, so that is a classic chicken way example, right? So when you go for this part, which make look simple, much more simple, but it's not, right? So same thing with the software as a service, a platform as a service, is exactly the same discussion.
So I guess as you bring up, so anybody who's new to the podcast, Nino's a long-time speaker at our integration event in London, and Nino introduced us all to his chicken way concept a while ago, which is kind of like not.
I don't know if I have a card here. Let me see.
Yeah, I feel like I've got one somewhere. But the idea is we instead of being brave and doing it properly, we take the easy way. So
you may have a card.
Yeah. Well, you bring us back to integration then, So last question, just in the interest of time. I think this will come up a lot at our integration summit. So we've got customers who build solutions on SaaS and PaaS solutions these days. So let's pretend we're building a platform as a service integration solution. We've got logic apps, functions, API management. A big sort of area at the minute is people talk about cost aspects, because we want, on the one hand, we've got the pure PaaS simplicity, which offers you the lowest SKUs. So let's say we pick logic app consumption and we pick functions consumption, but then sometimes a customer needs additional security requirements, so they kind of bring in virtual network, and that pushes you towards premium tiers and private endpoints, and everything gets more complex and more costly. And I think customers often have the initial expectation that it's all going to be simple and cheap, and then once they start doing all the advanced scenarios, it gets costly and complex. And I think a lot of people I've spoke to feel sometimes customers take that too far. They use security as the reason they take it so far. But where do you feel there's a balance between those two things?
Oh, yeah, definitely there is a balance, and most of the time is, I would say, the type of process which is not exactly correct, and the approach from customer, I would say. And when I say customer, don't get me wrong, I don't say customer as the final customer. I also say companies which actually providers, like any other company, even Microsoft or any other company across, they actually provide services and consulting, right? So, and customer often face this dilemma, right, across adopting software as a service or platform as a service or solution for their convenience, scalability and security, and so on, especially implementing very strong and stringent network security that could actually require premium tiers, right? Because they do, we know that. I would say my recommendation on this is just to conduct a good risk assessment. You need to conduct a good risk assessment. This is what I do, to identify, I would say, critical asset. What are actually your critical asset, and especially the respective security requirement. When you have this clear, then from there you can explore Azure native security feature that actually can offer a baseline protection level even without premium cost, right? That is the way. And for other additional security layer where actually are necessary, yeah, you can consider even hybrid approach that actually can selective apply premium security feature to only this or those specific asset with the high very security profile. In this way, you can achieve a balance between robust security and cost effectiveness. Yeah, right. This is the way I think. So,
what's your thoughts of that scenario? So, like, we get scenarios where, let's say, I've got two SaaS applications that I integrate, and if I put a logic app inside my VNet to integrate two SaaS applications, I'm potentially creating an entry point into my VNet through the logic app that I put inside the VNet if that was compromised. But then, if I'm integrating with two assets outside my VNet, is it sometimes better to just keep the integration outside the VNet as well, so we just don't have the entry point and the kind of the scope of your attack points really only that integration rather than anything wider than that?
Well, that is the point. I mean, is when we speak about solution, we speak about technologies.
Yeah.
Right? But we should start speaking about what is about this logic app. Right? How much, I mean, when we speak about security, it's not about like how do I protect my logic app across two different VNet. It's more about the question is, why are you using a logic app and for what? And who's actually is doing this logic app? It's very critical. It's managing what, right? That's is where the answer come up and say like, okay, I'm using this logic app to send invoicing, right? That's okay. And how much secure it must be this invoicing, right? In terms of availability, this service, this logic app, how much available it must be. About integrity, how much high is the integrity requirement for this information, this data, right? All these question, they actually provide the answer for the solution. And this is where what I'm meaning before about the assessment. That is the assessment I'm speaking about. Most of the time, I see people speaking about security and technology without even knows what these services are doing, for what, how much. I think you remember usually I use this mention the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's so important. I think I mentioned this one. It was my session last year in Integrate, and I actually mentioned the importance of you cannot even start thinking architecture if you don't have a clear understanding about confidentiality, integrity, availability of your asset. I see so many architects just spinning up things, organizing VNet and resources without an understanding about the profiling, the confidentiality, integrity, availability of the asset. And for me, it's just it's a mystery. I'm fascinating on that because I think how these people actually have been able to design this architecture correctly without this understanding, this vision, this visibility. This is why it's so important. And this is where it's driving also you about the cost, about software as a service, platform as a service, what kind of technology. And also coming back into the discussion about people, process, and technology, right? So starting from the top to the bottom, right? It's the same discussion, right? It's exactly the same thing. You cannot decide what is the best technology to use if you don't need, or if you don't know what do you need to protect and from what and how. Right? So it's always the same discussion again and again and again. It's just repeating like that.
Yeah. guess there's patterns in there as well, isn't there? I suppose if it's an integration solution, you're going to have common patterns about certain
Yeah,
integration. You have the same
yeah,
things, so you can use the same technologies. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Is and every time people ask me, I'm using this technology in here, a logic app in this VNet, is sending data to a function in this other VNet, and blah blah blah. My question are always the same. What is doing this logic app? Why
yeah.
isn't that? Maybe you don't even know. You don't even need a logic app or wherever. I don't know. Why this function? Why to VNet? Why? Right? So,
So one question you kind of made me think about there as well, I think is quite a good one, is when we talk about cost management, a common theme is that when I build something today, it's built around assumptions on features that I've got available to build that
yeah,
service with, and then in the future, often new features come out on Azure that might change how you would build it, and things could be done in a different way. A really great example would be, say you've built a function app on the premium service, we've got the new flex consumption coming out that would give you network integration. Likewise with API management, you've got new tiers coming out that
you
offer
just
network
touched the point
integration.
here.
Yeah,
Exactly, Mike. If you look about this and say, why do I need a premium consumption for this function?
yeah,
Why? If you look about the function and say, that's for me, I look about the function, I know what is managing, I know what kind of information is managing, for me is super, super critical. And what is providing me the premium is all these features together,
yeah,
guaranteed, that is guaranteeing me the security and the CIA triad I need to, for this specific function at this cost, which is going to less than implementing, I don't know what kind of other things way, right, to achieve exactly the same thing. If you look about premium feature, which actually provided you encryption on the
yeah,
fly for messaging, scalability on the fly, which mean very high availability, very high integrity. It's just switching a button. You do that and you get everything. Then that's the way you need to think about, oh, that's where I need the premium, because this is so critical for me, this specific asset. This is where I
What-
need the premium feature, because I don't even need developer or other people creating me feature is actually provided by a premium with a switch,
yeah.
right? So
So
why
what
do
about
we
when it comes to the driver for change? And so if I think back, integration solutions that were built a few years ago, things like you didn't have managed identity available at the time. Now later on
yeah,
you do, but one of the challenges is, I think we see this on the cloud a lot, is if there's no business project funding a change to a service, then it's difficult to make changes to fund changes to that service as part of a continuous improvement thing. So let's say let's keep it as an integration scenario. Let's say I've got a functional logic app and an API work together to solve this business requirement. Now I might have, if the business comes along and says, "Oh, we want this change to add a field," it's easy to, they'll provide a budget, the team would make the change, job done. But if there was a feature like, we've got a security change because we want to add managed identity, I find a lot of organizations struggle to say, right, who's going to pay for that change, because it's often an IT funded change as opposed to a business unit funded change. So it's much more difficult for those things to happen. And I think my question is, in cost management, we have the same kind of challenges. I think we have things where you would want to make a change to how something works because there's some new feature you can take advantage of in Azure, but the business doesn't have a change for that component. And the challenge is, how do you get a trigger for a piece of work to drive pain for that change to be done? What do you guys do in the security world in that space? How do you sort of see companies triggering a need for change for some non-business facing service kind of thing?
Well, I mean, in the security side, I would say what we are always really keen about is just security. So um, that is the first priority, to be honest. So when we look about security, is a security first, and we don't look at cost first,
Yeah,
right? We look at security first. We look about how to solve the problem. That's it.
yeah,
It's a different mindset, right? So when we look about two different resources or something, and there is security on board, there's a discussion. The point is just about, make this secure. That's it. And then after that, we can evaluate a different option depending by the risk assessment. But that is usually the way, to approach in security. This is where most of the time uh, arguments, all these kind of things are coming up, and where people don't really get and don't really understand and say, "Oh, that's too much costly," right? Say, "Yeah, okay, it's costing effective, but that's what you need." Right?
yeah,
That's where you start doing the risk assessment and say, do you accept the risk or not? Or what do you want to do? Right? So usually, I mean, security is, from one aspect, it's quite simple discussion because you just look about security itself, right? So that's my experience, right? So I don't look at cost first when I look about
yeah.
security, right? So
Well,
I just keen
so
about
let's
the
say you've got
security.
I'll give you an example, Nino. So let's say I've got a web app that's sat there for 2 years since it went live. Nobody's touched it, but we know one of the DLLs in it has gone out of support and might have a security vulnerability in it.
Yeah.
Let's say it's a medium priority one. How do you find the IT departments sort of sit you in, I mean, obviously I guess different companies are different, but there's an element of, right, somebody needs to go and do an update to that app, but the team that built it's not here anymore. There's a couple of people
Oh,
who might, but they're on different projects who
we are
sort of
back. Yeah, we are back in the same discussion before about governance, which
yeah,
is something that I honestly, usually, uh, unfortunately, every time I make this question, people struggle find the people
yeah,
actually using this DLL or function or whatever thing it is, and that's because it's missing. It's missing, I would say, all the governance and management side that usually you must have.
mm,
I don't blame people and company on that, to be honest, because unfortunately, I mean, we are living in a world where everything is so fast, right?
yeah,
Business,
yeah,
business, business, money, 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 business, business, business. It's very complicated to conciliate governance, a very good governance with business,
mm.
because business just wants money, production, they delivery. It's so complicated. So I don't blame people and company if they are not able to provide an
Well,
answer. So
I think
uh,
for me that this is one of the
that,
pieces where,
that,
to me,
just one thing is that
oh yeah,
this is where I would say, where actually technologies like logging and do kind of forensic can help. Usually this
yeah,
is what they do. Just look about historical logging, all these kind of things, and get the job done and say, hey, we got this, so we know who was using this, who did that, all these kind of things. And usually this is the path. Usually.
So I think what I'm feeling is that this is another example where I think that the discussion for me, there's a theme where FinOps and security can kind of help each other out, and
Oh
I'll
yeah.
explain what I mean by that, because I think things like a couple of the examples we've talked about over the last sort of 5 minutes. There's a theme of your company kind of needs a maintenance budget that it can use for. Really, there's a continuous maintenance thing on cloud where Microsoft changes stuff, adds new features. I need to update my applications to up to the latest versions of code, to the latest features on Azure, to make sure that one, I'm secure, and two, I'm taking advantage of cost optimizations. So like, example would be I reduce my API management plan by migrating from premium to the P2 versions or something like that. So for me, how security and FinOps can kind of help each other out. If you've got that maintenance budget to drive some of them changes, then actually the things that FinOps achieves in terms of cost savings can be reinvested in your IT department. This is the bit where I wonder, sometimes you've got that commitment of this is what my Azure bill is. The minute you save some money, is that given straight back to the business, or do you actually reinvest that in IT to do some of these maintenance things that improve your security, improve your cost optimization, so you get more savings later? And I think that, to me, that reinvestment of budgets, what can super, kind of empower security teams and FinOps teams to achieve more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's you actually trigger something here. Looking about my experience, all right? So my stories. I wanna provide the people in audience here the best advice ever about the FinOps, cost management, and cloud. In the past, I had the opportunity to work for it was a huge company, and they start using cloud, Azure, AWS, even on-premise data center, a lot of Azure everywhere across the world, and so on. And when I got on board in this company, I mean, I can guarantee you it was a really chaotic situation across for cost management. A lot. It was not really good cost control at all across everything, right? One thing I learned, very important, and this is my advice to you, is that I actually observed this is all the, I would say, cost department and people and what we call now FinOps department, everything, they just passive. They just got the cost from the cloud. They just stay there. And that was the process. People using the cloud, sending the cost from the cloud, or Microsoft sending invoices to the cost department, CFO, and so on. They just got the cost, signing up, that's it, job done. Don't do that. Don't do that. Your FinOps department, it must be proactive and active. It must work with the people. Don't just, the FinOps department, it must be people where actually work with the tools, things, everything they need to control cost. They must have visibility about what's happening in the cloud, to your resources, everything. And they must be in touch with the people on the cloud side and IT side to discuss continuously, having alert, all these kind of things, and say, hey, why I see this spike costing in here, in there. And also I recommend to the FinOps department having these people with a very basic training. You don't need to have techie people in FinOps. However, I strongly recommend a very basic training, like Microsoft Azure, basic training, like I don't remember now, there are several different training for Microsoft Azure. I'd say 900, I think, something like that. 900, I think, is the basic foundation about Microsoft Azure. Just get these people, put these people in a room somewhere, AZ 900, get a certification. It's very easy certification. Anyone can do that. But they get a kind of very good understanding about the cloud, everything, and put these people with the tools and working with good expertise, across everything. And you will see such a much better value, about cost controlling. FinOps today, it must be an active role, right? Not a passive. I see so many people do FinOps in passive way. That is the biggest mistake you can.
So give me an example of what you mean when you say passive. I mean, I'm kind of
Passive
feeling
is
like...
passive is when FinOps department, they just get invoice, receive invoice, and that's it. That's passive.
Yeah.
This is what they do.
Yeah, so
Nothing
to
more than
me,
that. They manage and say, we have a budget of 1 million for the cloud, right? Every month they receive invoicing from Microsoft, and they get this invoicing. I can guarantee you they don't do anything. That's it. They just get the invoice, look at the invoice, everything, and say, yeah, okay, check. This is what is coming.
Yeah.
But they don't have any clue about what is going on. Why I'm spending this money? For what? Right?
Yeah.
There is no interaction at all from the FinOps department, the CFO FinOps department, to all the other department, even the CIO and the other people. I can guarantee you that. They are just passive.
Yeah, that's where we think we need to be going out
anymore.
I think we need people going out and speaking to teams and asking them.
Absolutely.
Your team spent this amount of money. What does that mean? They can see their own data, and
absolutely,
that's very much how we're doing cost reviews, which is really good. Nino, I'm just conscious of time. I've taken loads of your time on this podcast, and I knew this would happen because we always get so carried away talking about stuff, and it's I love talking with you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in June so we can talk about this over beers.
Yeah, me too.
So hopefully we can get you back some point in maybe a couple of months to talk about some follow-ups here. Hopefully we might get a few questions off people as well. I think this will be a really popular topic. And hopefully we'll get some questions we can pick up in a future podcast. But thank you so much. Thanks for listening, everybody, today, and have a great week, and we'll see you on the next episode.